we're going to do factor by grouping, and factor by grouping is just like yesterday, but we're doing it twice. So yesterday we did factor by taking out a GCF, or a greatest common factor, and now we're going to do it 2 times in order to do factor by grouping. So same thing as yesterday, but now we're going to take it piece by piece here. So the very first step when we do factor by grouping, we're going to group the first 2 terms together and the last 2 terms together. So here on the example, you group the first 2 in pink, and then in blue here, we're going to group the second 2. Make sure to include that plus sign in front of the 2 in that second group, because it'll be more important when you're working with negative numbers. The second thing we do is we are going to factor out the GCF of each group. So treat each group separately, and it'll be exactly like what we did yesterday. So in the pink group, they factored out this x squared. So what they did is they divided each one by x squared like we did yesterday. And then they resulted what we got, which is x plus 3. Okay, then we want to, the GCF from each binomial will become one factor, and the remaining binomial will be the other factor. Okay, so with our 2 color highlighters, it's easier to see. The x plus 3 here is the same. So when it's the same, that becomes our GCF. It's common. So the greatest common factor in this situation is x plus 3. So we're going to factor that out. When we factor that out in blue here, you're going to notice that that's going to be what remains, just like we did yesterday. So the GCF is x plus 3. We factor that out. If we technically were to divide each one by x plus 3, then you would get x squared plus 2 as your remainder, and that's how we do that type of problem. So I kind of set it up nice and easy for you guys for 1 and 2. It's just getting practice, just doing the basics. So here with my highlighter, it's easy to see. The GCF is 2x plus 1, so I'm going to factor out 2x plus 1. And then in blue, I have 5x minus 7, because when you divide each one by the GCF, you're going to end up with your 5x minus 7. So take a second and see if you can do number 2. Hopefully you took a second, press pause, and to do number 2. So we are going to pull out the 3y minus 4. So, sorry, 3y plus 4. 3y plus 4. And then in blue, we had 2y plus 6, and that now becomes a group. Done. So that's the basics. Now let's actually start doing, applying what we know here. Okay, so in the very beginning, again, the very first step is going to be group the first 2. I'm going to do that in pink here. Okay, that's our first group. We're going to just focus on just the pink group. And then we're going to focus on the green group here, 12xy plus 6y. So in the pink group, if I were to cover up the green group, we would just focus on the very first one and figure out what the GCF is. Well, the GCF in this situation is going to be 8, because 8 divides into 16 evenly and it divides into 8 evenly. So the GCF is going to be 8. But then if you notice, they both have an x in common. Well, you always factor out the lowest exponent, and that is x in this case. So like we did in the past, like yesterday, we factor out the 8x and divide each one by the GCF in order to get what remains. So 16 divided by 8 gets me 2. X squared divided by x just gets me x. Bring down the plus sign. 8 divided by 8 gets me 1. X divided by x gets me 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Or you can just know that these 2 will cancel out. Whenever you cancel something out, you just get 1. Okay? Same thing here. We look at the GCF. The GCF of 12xy and 6y, we look at the numbers first. The number would be 6, because 6 both divides into 12 and divides into 6 evenly. So that is our GCF. But if you notice, they both have a y in common. So y will also be my GCF. So I'm going to go ahead and write the 6y on the outside. And then I'm going to divide. Well, 12 divided by 6 gets me 2. The y's are going to cancel, but I'm still left with x. Here we bring down the plus, and then look, the 6 cancels out, the y cancels out, so I'm just left with 1. So if you notice, it's just like yesterday. We just did 2 separate GCF problems, and we combined it together to do factor by grouping. Just like before, we have 2x plus 1 as common here. So we're going to write the 2x plus 1 as my GCF. I pull it out. And then what remains here is going to be the 8x plus the 6y. We're done. That's factor by grouping. Okay, so we're going to skip to the next page because 4 is very similar. And I'm going to do a couple more with you, and I feel like you're going to do just fine. So we're going to go ahead and scroll down here to the number 5. The first step always is to group the first two, group the second two. Remember to include that plus sign with the 2. In purple, the GCF. You have to think of a number that goes into both 3 and 9, and that's going to get me 3. So I'm going to divide each one by 3. Then x squared and x, well, I can only factor out an x because there's only one x that you can divide each one by. If you said x squared, that wouldn't work because there's not enough x's in that 9x part for you to take out 2 x's. So I'm going to write the 3x on the outside, and then we need to figure out what's left over once you divide. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can divide by 3x, or you can say what times 3x gets me 3x squared, and that's going to give me x. Either way works. It just depends on who you are and how your brain works. Bring down your plus sign. 9 divided by 3 gets me 3. The x's cancel. We're done with the purple group. Move to the pink group. The only thing that's common between 2x and 6 is going to get me 2. So my GCF for the pink group is a positive 2, and I always like to write the positive 2 because sometimes you can have minus. It's going to help us out later on. Now what's left over, again, when you divide, is just going to be x plus 3. Because 2 divided by 2 is going to cancel. 6 divided by 2 gets me 3. Well, that's the goal. The goal is for you to get the same thing inside the parentheses, which we did in this case, and then the outside becomes a group 2. So I have x plus 3 on the outside, and then 3x plus 2. Now you 100% could switch these groups. You could write 3x plus 2 first, and it wouldn't matter. Okay, as long as they're together. As long as the x plus 3 is a group and 3x plus 2 is a group, it doesn't matter. Okay, I want you to go ahead and try number 6. Hopefully you press pause to try number 6. Okay, so we have the grouping the first 2 in blue here, and then in pink, we're grouping the second 2. You should have found that your GCF was 5x for the first group, and your GCF was 2 in the second group. When you do that, you pull out the 5x. You always write your GCF out in front when you are doing these factoring parts. Okay, and you're left with 2x minus 5. We pull out that 2 of the GCF here, plus 2. And then when you divide, you also get 2x minus 5, which is the goal. Because always you get the same thing. So again, here is my common one. It's now my GCF, 2x minus 5. And then the 5x plus 2 is also going to be, because that's what remains when you factor out a 2x minus 5. Okay, I feel like most people usually get it at this point. What I would like to do is do number 7 and do number 9, and I think you can take it from here. So let's look at number 7 because it's a little bit different, but not too much different. So the first group, same thing, same process. First 2, second 2. When you look here, your GCF is going to be 4 because 4 divides evenly into 20 and into 24. Now, when you look between these two, you have x cubed and you have x squared. The lowest or the smallest degree between x cubed and x squared is x squared. So we have to pull out both x's, the x squared. We always write out our GCF on the outside and then divide each one. So 20 divided by 4 gets 5. X cubed divided by x squared just gets me x. Remember, you just subtract exponents. 3 minus 2 gets me 1. Bring down the plus sign. 24 divided by 4 gets me 6. The x squares cancel out. Now look, if you notice, these are the same already. That's good. I mean, then we don't have to do a lot of work here. The only thing that's common in 5x and 6 in our second group in blue is 1. That's the only thing we can factor out. So I'm going to bring out a 1. If you want to write out 1 here to stay organized, you can. but 1 is the only factor that goes into 5x and 6. And then that leaves us with 5x plus 6, which is what we want because now they're the same. And on the outside, we have 4x squared plus 1. Okay, so my final answer would be 5x plus 6, and then 4x squared plus 1. Okay, the last one we're going to do is number 9. Okay, the last one we are going to do is number 9. We're going to, again, group the first two, and we're going to group the second two. And here's where it is super important that you include that minus sign with the 42. The first group, we have to figure out what goes into both of them. What goes into both of them is 5. But then don't forget, you can also factor out an x because there is an x in common. So I have 5x on the outside like normal. You put your GCF on the outside and divide each one. 35 divided by 7, 35 divided by 5 just told you gets you 7. X squared divided by x just gets me x. Bring down your minus sign. 30 divided by 5 gets me 6. The x's cancel. We're good there. Now we move on to the next group, treating them completely separate. Whenever, like I told you yesterday, whenever there's a minus sign all the way out in front of your group, I don't really care about this guy with the negative 30. I care if there's a minus sign all the way out in front with that group. I'm also going to factor out a minus sign with it. It's going to make things a lot easier. If you don't factor out a minus sign, you're going to realize that your signs are off. You always want to factor out a negative if there's a minus in the front of your group. Then you will notice that you can factor out a 6. You can't factor out an x because this 36 here does not have an x. When I factor out a negative 6, that is now going to get me, because negative 42 divided by negative 6 gets me a positive 7, then your x. Positive 36 divided by negative 6 gets me a negative 6. And now I think we're good to go because look, they're the same, and that's the goal. So I have 7x minus 6. And then I also have the 5x minus 6, which is left over. 5x minus 6. All right, you guys can start your homework.